welcome to another episode on the UX on Minds podcast. And today we're speaking to Dr. Gyles Morrison. Now, Dr. Giles is a very, very interesting person and someone I've been really looking forward to getting onto the podcast. You could call it the pioneer of clinical UX. He's also a UX mentor, career coach, international speaker. So he's got a lot of experience. He's extremely talented as well, and a really deep person, and someone you could spend hours talking to. And that's what I wanted to do on this podcast. Obviously, we had limited time. I hope you enjoy all the nuggets and the things that he brings up. And if you are interested in clinical UX, that it gives you that needed spark and inspiration to continue on your journey. So sit back, enjoy, and let's get into this podcast. Okay, so I'd like to welcome Dr. Gyles Morrison onto the podcast. It's nice to have you here. I think we've been in contact actually for a while on LinkedIn. You were there in my days of transitioning over to UX, so it's nice to finally have you on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem at all. No problem at all. So you're a UX clinical strategist, as far as I'm aware at the moment. And what does that
That's
kind of
right.
involve? If you want to do a bit of an intro into what you're doing now.
Sure. I've been working in the field of clinical UX here now for just over 9 years. So this
Okay.
is after first working as a medical doctor. And this career in clinical UX really is very much similar to what you do as a UX professional. But my area of focus is on the experiences that clinicians and patients have with healthcare technology and services. So I still have to use Figma or whatever design tool of choice we're using these days. I still use all kinds of research methods, but a big part of my work is to identify clinical risk either to clinicians making mistakes, which could lead to harm or death of patients, or even harm or death
Okay.
to themselves.
Wow.
And indeed, clinical risk to the patients themselves, where they, when they're interacting with a product or service, could be harmed or killed, unfortunately, or at least
Wow.
their treatment or health outcomes aren't as optimized as they should be. Another massive part of the work I do is medical legal ethics as well. So
Okay.
there's a big component of, well, we can do something, but should we be doing it?
Okay.
The other massive part as well is behavior change. I would say behavior change is important in UX in all industries, but particularly in healthcare, where we're trying to at times encourage clinicians to use technology that they've never used before, patients to use technology as a first touch
Yeah.
point with healthcare, as opposed to speaking with their doctor or pharmacist or a receptionist to book an appointment. So it's massive changes for people that goes against what they're used to. And that's what I would say some of the reasons why it's a lot more complicated working in clinical UX than UX in a few other industries. But yeah, like I said, I've been in this field now for just over 9 years. I worked as a doctor for 3 years beforehand, and I loved working as a doctor, but I felt there was more I could be doing for patients. I fell into UX as a result. But it's the best career decision I've made going into UX for sure.
That's cool. That's nice to hear. Also, I imagine from the listeners as well that are thinking as well to move to UX. And also like from what you've just said now, like obviously we know the UX is everywhere in the sense of it's something that affects people's lives, but more so in medical, like in healthcare, etc. Because like you said, I imagine like it's like even a small like a thing can mean the difference between a patient being harmed and not. So there's kind of a lot riding on your role.
Yeah, I would say so. I think what's a challenge for it is there's still quite a poor understanding of what a UXer does. So as much as there can be almost instant recognition of, well, if you're a Dr. Giles and you're doing UX, you must be able to do a lot because of your medical training. But there still can be issues with actually being given the freedom to do the real work that needs to be done of a clinical UX professional, which, similar to any other UXer, is make sure that there's evidence that backs up the decisions that you're making. It can't be guesswork. It can't be, well, we know generally this is how things work. Like, even if you are copying a very similar or tried and tested design pattern, there's still some sort of usability testing or real life evidence that
Of
needs to
course,
be
yeah.
utilized just to confirm that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, of
but
course.
particularly like in healthcare, there's all this talk of using AI. There's a lot of
Mm,
talk of generally trying to shift the patient's care towards something that's more patient control, which I'm for. Like, I agree that we should have the
mm,
general public be able to manage their health a bit more, but we
mm.
can't completely remove clinicians from the equation. There's still a lot
Yeah.
going on with healthcare where you need a specialist. And so, one of my tasks now, which is quite a challenge, is one of the reasons I go into clinical strategy, is getting companies, getting small teams, large organizations, understanding where are there clinical risks, where there are really actually opportunities to cause failure here.
Mm,
Yeah, you might make some money, but you
mm.
could be doing some serious damage in the process. Because, like
Yeah.
you said, it is high risk. If you're telling
Mm,
someone to not use a clinician to assess their health and the system makes a mistake and someone actually gets the wrong diagnosis, they get delay in treatment or actually they deteriorate.
yeah.
And then when they do see a clinician, they die. Like, this is an avoidable death. This is avoidable harm if the
Mm,
design of the product of the service that wraps around it was better. So yeah,
yeah.
that's a major challenge I have to try and
Yeah.
overcome with some of my clients at times.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, like with your current role at the moment, would you say that you're in more of an advisory role in the sense of are you doing that hands-on research,
Mm.
design, etc., or are you focused more on the strategy of the organization, maybe setting up teams?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a mixture. So as a strategist, a lot of my work is really, as mentioned before, relating to clinical risk, but
Mm,
also risk assessing the success of projects in general.
right. Okay.
So as much as there may or may not be clinical risk to patients, that doesn't mean that the business case for a digital health project or a new service in healthcare could be successful. Like, there may be holes with it, which
Mm,
aren't fully understood by the people that are working on it. So
yeah.
my job as well there is looking at, well, where's the risk to the business? Where's
Yeah.
the risk of project failure?
Mm,
And particularly where they've not used UX resource before, what does it mean to use a UXer? So how many UXers are going to need? What skills,
mm,
what techniques are going to be used? What knowledge are they going to need to have? What technologies, tools are they going to need to actually use to get the job done? What sort of
yeah.
budget is going to be appropriate here? What's a realistic timeline? I'm sure
Mm,
you faced it. Most people
yeah.
who've worked in UX, they've been asked to do UX work in anywhere from 75% to even 25% of the amount of time they really need to do
Oh
the
yeah.
work, or they've been told to actually not do any research, any meaningful research, should I say. So
Yeah.
there's been no meaningful primary research. There might have been some secondary research, but even secondary research I
Yeah.
find tends to be not as common as it needs to be.
Yeah,
So
no. As a researcher
yeah.
myself, that's galling to hear
Mhm.
when research is skipped or like advised to be skipped because yeah, like going back to what you said before, like you just create something based on a lot of assumptions or just well, they did it that way or that seems to work, let's do it that way. But
Mhm.
like you don't know if your users are going to use it in the same way or if it's going to come out like if it's going to be used in the same way like so
Mhm.
yeah like design without research for me is a setup for failure so yeah
Always,
completely agree.
always without fail. And this isn't something that is new. We've known this probably since the dawn of time. There's always has to be some evidence that backs up what you're
Yeah.
doing. Because especially in my line of work with healthcare, when things
Mm,
go wrong, people die.
yeah,
People get
so
seriously harmed,
mm,
preventably, you know,
yeah.
unacceptable deaths, unacceptable harm happens.
Mm,
So people should care about this a bit more. But another truth, just a reality of healthcare, is that if it was based on people doing what they thought was right, we
mm,
wouldn't have the atrocities that we're seeing in healthcare at times.
mm, yeah,
Unfortunately, there is a lot of decisions that are made that are completely based on profit, based on how does
yeah,
it ensure that the really people's in power make sure that they've made their money. So
yeah.
that's a lot of my work as a strategist,
Mm,
is looking at all of these different variables that are putting the benefit of the clinicians and patients their lives, their health at risk? How do I lower that risk?
Yeah.
So there are some of this stuff that I can identify very quickly. There's other times I have to go through a much more formal process to identify the
Mm,
risk, whether it's heuristic evaluation, task analysis,
mm,
interviews, focus groups, observational studies, definitely
mm.
secondary research, because it's very rare you work on a project and nobody else has ever done anything like it.
Yeah.
I still recall my master's thesis was specifically looking at people living with sickle cell disease. This is a
Okay.
hereditary blood condition where the
Mm,
red cells go into a crescent moon shape when they give off oxygen. So
yeah.
they've cycled around the body, they've given off their oxygen, and if there's levels of stress or illness or cold weather, these sickled red cells can accumulate and get
Mm,
stuck in very tiny blood vessels, causing a lot of pain. And when this
okay.
happens, it can also cause blockages that can be fatal in different parts of the body.
Mm,
So basically, this is to be treated as a medical emergency. And I
mm,
did the secondary research, and because this population, they tend to be predominantly people from um, Black African Caribbean community.
okay.
There's either issues of racism, issues of ignorance,
Mm,
because it's a rare disease. That's what do you do with this sort of disease? We don't know, we've not seen it before,
yeah.
or a failure to recognize that people really need to have very strong pain relief, morphine, opioid, pain relief.
Mm,
And there's times where actually a lot of these patients feel quite victimized,
mm,
belittled, because people aren't believing what the issue they're having. And the secondary research was so overwhelmingly um, compatible with each other. Like they were all saying the same message. In fact,
mm,
some of the articles I was reading in journal publications were in themselves literary reviews. So they
mm.
have already done, the same secondary research I've done. And
Yeah.
it was all so comprehensive, saying the same message. I didn't interview not one patient for that research because there was
Mm,
nothing new I would learn. There was nothing
yeah.
speaking to them about their personal experiences was going to say anything different. It was just going to
Mm,
confirm all the issues that the secondary research
yeah.
shows. So that's an example of how secondary research can be so powerful and so quick. That secondary
Yeah.
research took me the equivalent of a couple of days, really. And even
Wow.
then, I had
Yeah.
a lot of evidence to point towards a particular conclusion after
Mm,
a few hours of work.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, you have to, you know, conduct these different types of research upfront, as we all already know. But a
Mm,
lot of my work is heuristic evaluation to look for risk,
mm-hmm,
task analysis, observational studies, interviews. Again,
mm,
to look where's there risk to patients, risk to clinicians.
mm. That's
Um,
cool.
I tend to supervise the work that's done by juniors as well,
Okay.
particularly my students. So I
Mm,
teach a clinical UX course for students.
mm-hmm,
This gets someone who's either come from a clinical background, a UX background, or someone who's
mm.
even new to clinical practice and to UX
Right.
work. They go through a variety of units and modules of content and training material
Mm,
and classroom teaching, one-to-ones with me, and obviously
okay.
assignments as well to test what they've learned in order
Yeah.
so they can work at the level of around a junior to midweight UXer. If they've
Okay.
already worked as a UXer, then this might also get them more to midweight to senior, because the
Okay.
courses always take about a year or more for them to
Okay.
complete. It's very,
Okay.
very intense, quite full on. So
Mm.
it's
So this
teaching keeps me
course,
busy.
sorry,
Mhm.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I was just saying that teaching is a big part of the work that I do,
Mm,
along with some primary research methods, but a lot of my work is consulting, strategy work, and
okay.
sharing my knowledge with others, really.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I wanted to ask about this course that you ran or
Mhm.
this school. So to be a student that you don't need to have come from a medical background, even if you've come from an unrelated UX field, you could still apply for
Mhm.
this school and get into
Yeah,
clinical UX.
that's right. Because the nature of clinical UX, of course, me coming from a doctor background, gives me a lot of insight, a lot of knowledge
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
simply completing my medical degree provided. And even
Mm-hmm.
more so when I was working as a doctor as well. But you
Mm,
can teach that, the aspects that's
of
needed. So
course. Yeah.
you don't need to know how paracetamol and ibuprofen reduces fever and pain in a patient. You don't even need to know that those drugs even have that effect. You do
Yeah.
need to know, though, that patients can have a variety of signs and symptoms which are associated with the disease. And if
Mm,
you know the specific diseases that you're trying to treat, you need to have an awareness of
mm,
what those uh, actual signs and symptoms could be. Because if you're
mm.
going to track them in an app, if you're going to ask questions about them, you need to know
Mm.
what they are. So that's what's taught is like, what's a general process of trying to assess for health? Which
Mm.
is beyond what people experience, even if they've seen the doctor. Because we all know you go to a doctor, they ask you some questions, they, prod you in places, and they've got their stethoscope out. Everybody knows about the tendon hammer, even though they rarely even get hit by a tendon hammer, banging them on the knee. We know of this stuff, but what's actually the doctor thinking when they're going through that process?
Yeah.
That's, for example, one of the topics that I teach the students is to
Okay.
understand that. Because then when they're like, okay, I want a digital tool that can
Mm.
help do this,
Mm.
they have to be thinking, well, what does this actually involve? What do I need to keep in mind? So
Yeah.
that's one of the many topics that they have to learn is what goes through the mind of a clinician when they
Mm.
are actually assessing a patient, making a diagnosis, formulating a treatment plan, treating them. So obviously, if
Mm.
you've gone to medical school, gone to nursing school, studied one of the other clinical healthcare professional roles, you would learn this stuff, but it can
Yeah.
be taught outside of those settings as well.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's interesting. It's just in case anybody who is listening is thinking about getting into clinical UX and maybe they're
Mhm.
put off thinking, oh, I've not got a medical background. It's nice to know that those things can be taught and it's not
Yeah.
absolutely necessary.
That's right. Most of my students, about 90% of them or so, have never had any experience with healthcare other than as a
Wow. Okay.
patient or the loved one of a patient. So I've had a few
Okay.
clinicians
Yeah.
who become students. Some of my current students are clinicians as well. But like I said,
Mm.
most of them don't come from a clinical background.
Okay.
Um, I think what is useful is if you have done UX before, but again, if you've
Yeah.
never done UX before, you've never done any sort of short course, that is taught as well.
Okay.
One thing I have been very vocal about, and I think it's quite an interesting segue to another topic point for us then. There are sometimes students come and they're like, oh yeah, I've done a boot camp. Not all boot camps
Mm.
are equal. And to be brutally honest, I don't recommend taking the Google UX course. I don't think it's
Yeah.
particularly useful. The
Okay.
main reason for me is the fact that your work is assessed by another student,
Mm.
which just blows my mind to think that
Yeah.
that is suitable. I'm not saying you can't get advice and guidance and feedback from fellow students. In fact, you should. But if
Mm.
that's the only form of
No, no.
assessment, then that's a
Yeah.
problem. That's a
It's a bit
huge, huge,
risky.
huge problem. Yeah. So like
Yeah.
if someone's told me they've done like the Google UX course or some other boot camp where on questioning them, they clearly don't know some
Mm.
basics, they haven't done certain techniques. Like there's a lot of boot camps, they don't teach about heuristic evaluation. They don't
Mm.
actually explain what a thematic analysis actually is, that they don't really
Yeah.
have an understanding of this.
Yeah.
Where they know how to use Figma, but they deliberately don't use Actual, and the excuse is it's too hard. The main reason you should say you don't use Actual is that you don't have a license. You've never been taught to use it. It shouldn't be
Mm.
you tried it, it was too complicated. It's not that
Yeah.
complicated if you try.
Mm.
Actually, if you're
Yeah.
trying to do proper prototypes, you would need something like Actual. You don't have to use it
Yeah.
for most projects, I'll be honest, you don't.
Yeah.
And they have the ability for you to create a calculator like from scratch, like
Mm.
all the different calculations. You can have all those
Yeah.
buttons. Like no one needs to do that. It's not necessary. But the
If you
point
want, you
still
can.
stands. Yeah, but the point still stands. If you're doing a prototype, you
Mm.
need to be able to test out the the so-called unhappy paths. What are the paths someone's going to take when they face an error? Then you need some
Yeah.
feedback from the system to correct from the error. You need to test this.
Of
And
course.
Actual
Yeah.
tends to be much better for prototyping for those sort of purposes. So yeah, the point still stands. If someone still has quite limited UX knowledge, even if they've developed some practical skills, the theory
Mm.
needs to be strong as well. And so I'll be saying
Yeah.
to them, well, here's some additional training material. We'll have some additional one-to-ones to get you up to speed. Because
Yeah.
as a massive problem in the industry, we've got a lot of people who know how to use Figma, but they don't know why they're making this prototype. They don't know why they're using this
Yeah.
design pattern. They're not
Yeah.
coming up with designs that's based on evidence that the researchers have
No.
come up with, they've done any research for.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough people who are giving constructive feedback on how to improve these designs that are being made and even
Mm.
improve the processes that we're following to do UX work.
Yeah.
So students
Completely
get that
agree.
proper education on my course to try and
Yeah.
compensate for that lack of way of working and education
Mm.
otherwise.
That's good. That's good. It's nice to hear.
Mhm.
I just wanted to go back to you. In this conversation, you mentioned that before you were a physician, a doctor.
Mhm.
Like, what made you want to transition to becoming a UX clinical strategist? What was it? I don't know. You're just interested in behavior, how people use
Mhm.
medical tools, or was it just I don't know, like a desire to change from what you were doing before, and UX just seemed to
Yeah, so
land on your lap?
mhm. Yeah, so I didn't know about UX before I left medicine. I worked as a doctor for 3 years. I
Okay.
loved working with patients. It was an honor really to be able to help people in some of their most vulnerable, challenging times in life.
Mm.
Um, and some of the most joyous, like when it's delivering babies, for example. But I
Mm.
was definitely there when people have died, or close to death, or when they're really, really in a very bad state,
Mm.
and the road for recovery was clear, and we
Yeah.
expect them to recover, but it was going to be a long and painful journey. So I had a lot of
Mm.
good experiences because of that. But problem for me when working as a clinician, though, is quite a few areas. So there's the politics at play, politics
Mm.
which encouraged us to sometimes lie that we don't have enough hours to do the work and then we're having to work overtime. There's
Mm.
understaffing as well.
Mm.
There's even more of a problem with that. In fact, a lot of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals leaving the profession. You have to move house every year as well, particularly if you're outside of
Wow.
London. It's very normal to move house every year to get a clinical job.
Mm.
I really wasn't happy as well with how the doctors, it could feel like a cult sometimes, if I'm really honest with you, in the
Mm.
NHS, which
Mm.
gave rise to the idea that you should just work overtime for free.
Wow.
And there's a lot of idealization going on of the consultants, like they can do no wrong. And trust me, they can do wrong. And so, as much as I
Mm.
loved working with the patients, I was losing myself. I didn't have the energy or the time to do anything for myself.
Mm.
Um, it was quite dark sometimes where you look at your relationship status, you earn okay money, not greatest of money. And this is to be very clear. Doctors don't earn that
Mm.
much money. There were times when
No.
I would take home about £1,500 a month for a few
Wow.
months.
Okay.
So it's not bad money, but considering
No,
the
but for what
years
you do.
working and the responsibility, that's not actually great money.
No, no,
So
no. And
yeah,
also the
and
years of
then
study to get to that
exactly,
stage is
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So there'll be times where you just look and you're like, what's actually the point of all of this? So
Mm.
unless you've got a real passion to just work as a doctor and not do anything else, it's kind of hard to do it. Like I was doing a lot of music, cooking. A
Wow.
fun fact that whilst I was working as a doctor, I was on the UK TV program Come Dine With Me, the Christmas special
Oh,
back
really?
in 2013. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll have to
So
go and watch that now.
yeah, that was a lot of fun, a lot of fun. But I remember acutely, last how much that was the best time of my years working as a doctor was actually not working as a doctor, was doing that.
Oh,
And it wasn't even
makes you
because I was
think.
on TV. It was just because I was able to do stuff that I really, really enjoyed without
Yeah.
um any other pressures with it. Because don't get me wrong, like I
Mm.
said, I loved working with patients.
Yeah.
But there's pressures that you face as a doctor which you just shouldn't. You shouldn't be
Yeah.
felt forced to work overtime, not because patients are dying. Like if you got a patient who's dying, of course you're going to work overtime. You don't want them to die.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
because the consultant wants you to write down blood results on paper that they could see on computers. There's
Mm.
some they have to come in an hour early to do that and stuff, and like
Yeah.
this is madness.
No.
So, so yeah, as alluded to before, I wanted to have a career where I could be creative, or at least have
Mm.
time to be creative in my personal life, but still
Yeah.
be able to help people, still be able to impact people's health in a positive way. So
Mm.
I knew I was into digital health, but it would take me another 6 months to learn of a career in clinical UX,
Mm.
or specifically UX in general. Because then when I realized that you could be a doctor or at least a healthcare professional working in UX in healthcare, bringing in those years of experience and training into the work that you're doing, I was like, this is a unique career.
Yeah.
So I did a master's in human computer interaction. I became well read on the topic. I found mentors, and that led me down that path of clinical UX. And
Wow.
now we flash forward to 2024, and yeah, it's been a wonderful ride.
That's cool. That's cool. Were there any like obstacles or challenges that you remember facing, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I would say the first biggest challenge was actually not having enough supporters of what I was doing. So it's
Mm.
not so much to say that there was loads of people that were actively against what I was doing. There
Mm.
just wasn't as many people who were stepping in to actually help me. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of encouragement for me to continue to work as a clinician, even though I was trying to completely change careers. So that
Yeah.
was a really massive challenge to overcome, was being my greatest cheerleader,
Yeah.
so that I could weather the storm, so to speak, and persevere through any
Yeah.
challenges I would be facing with trying to get a job.
Mm.
Um, the other challenges was also being clear on what type of UX professional would I want to be. And I think
Mm.
that can be quite hard for a lot of people. So
Mm.
again, this might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to just say it because we've got to speak up. So the first controversial one was about the Google UX course.
Okay.
It's about the term UX, UI, or UI, UX.
Mm. Yeah.
I personally don't like to use that term. I think
No.
it's a lot of confusion. The
Yeah.
vast majority of people that use the term to describe their own work, they're saying that they are a UI designer
Yeah.
who is used to designing stuff that don't just look good, but are functionally good as well.
Yeah.
And fair enough, you're a UI designer that does a good job. That's what that means then.
Yeah.
If you're a UX designer and a UI designer, to me, that means that you use research findings, whether you have found those findings yourself, someone else might have done the research,
Mm.
but you use research to go through a iterative design process,
Yeah.
and you use feedback on those designs to make sure that you've got the best design possible. UI designers don't have to do that. UI designers
No.
can just come up with the design, not that is similar to a
Yeah.
graphic designer, and present that work. So I feel that there's
Exactly.
times when UX UI is being used interchangeably with UX, but it's never
Mm.
really what a UX designer traditionally should be doing. It's less than that. It's mainly UI design using what they believe is the best thing to do for a
Yeah.
design, and then
Yeah.
presenting this. Um, so yeah, I never thought I would be a UI designer per se, but I
Mm.
knew I would do UI design work. I knew that if I'm going to solve a problem, or at least be involved with solving a problem, I
Mm.
will be involved in the visual design component, but that's not my
Yeah.
primary goal is what's the problem,
Yeah.
find that out as much as possible, find the best solution to that problem,
Mm.
as a set of requirements, and
Yeah.
then do my part to turn those requirements into reality. So that might
Yeah.
involve wireframing and high fidelity
Yeah.
prototyping. It may just involve conversation.
Mm.
Regardless, I need to make sure that I've got the clear requirements and pass it on to the people that do their part that I do, because I don't code either. I know a bit about obviously coding languages and front end, back end development, like why
Yeah.
you and stuff, because I teach on these topics, but I'm not a developer myself.
No, me neither. No.
Yeah, my lane is research,
Mm.
and UX design,
Yeah.
but it involves by the virtue of that some UI design work, and now
Yeah.
a lot of strategy is UX planning, project planning, business
Yeah.
planning, things like that.
Yeah.
as well. And that was a challenge in the beginning because it wasn't so bad when I started out about 10 years ago,
Mm.
understanding what a UX designer does. I think the term
Mm.
UX UI came up more around the last 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
So it didn't make it difficult for me. But
Mm.
trying to have a title was difficult because even 10 years ago, if you called yourself a UX designer, it was still assumed that you used Sketch, you used
Yeah.
Graphle, you used Photoshop or Illustrator to come up with designs. That was your main job. And there
Yeah.
was emphasis on designer being visual designer rather than designer
Yeah.
meaning solver.
Yeah.
So
No, no,
that's it,
no. Yes.
the second problem. And then the final problem, which even to this day I still face at times, is no one's looking for a doctor that does UX. Like they don't assume that they'll ever find a doctor that's doing UX in healthcare. So when I'm found, they're like, oh wow, this is amazing. But
Mm.
they're not normally looking for it. And even the term clinical
Right.
UX is not everyday language. So
No,
it's
no, it's
becoming
true.
more common. You Google clinical UX, or even more so, you go on LinkedIn and look for job titles that involve clinical UX. There are quite a lot of people using it. And
Okay.
to be blunt, unless I really, really have missed something, they've all copied me, or they've seen what I've done, or I've taught them, or I've mentored them, or something like that. That's why they're
You're the
using it.
father
'Cause
of clinical UX.
yeah, yeah, no one else was using this term before
Yeah.
2016 and 2015 than me.
Mm.
Um, but it's still not everyday language. So there's
Yeah.
still a challenge of getting people to recognize that clinical UX is actually a niche within UX, that it is a
Yeah.
recognized um, field, that there is
Yeah.
that complexity with ethics and law, or with healthcare
Mm.
economics, with actually understanding disease assessment and treatment. So it's more
Yeah.
complicated as a result.
Mm.
So yeah, those are the challenges.
Yeah.
It's really people understanding what this work is.
Yeah.
The fact that trying to give yourself a title can be a challenge, and
Mm.
even just like developing yourself as a professional is quite lonely, I would say as
Yeah.
well. When
Yeah.
you're going
Completely
into a
agree.
field that's so unique, there wasn't a lot of
Yeah.
us in the beginning, but I've
Mm.
I've kind of found my tribe. I kind of created a tribe by teaching, um, talks, conferences, even being on your podcast, for example, and people come
Yeah.
to me. So that's helped as well, though.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. And again, thanks for coming on. Um,
Mhm.
so maybe for those who are listening and are thinking about transitioning over, what advice would you give them? So yeah, I don't know, just someone who's never worked in clinical UX, maybe they know a bit of
Mhm.
UX, they're interested in it. What advice would you give them on their kind of next step in their journey?
Yeah. So there's 5 things that someone can do whenever they are changing careers in general, let alone going into clinical UX.
Mm.
Um, have some sort of formal study. Formal study doesn't have to mean going to university, doesn't even have to mean paying a lot of money for a boot camp. It can
Mm.
still mean that you have gone to a book that is dedicated to a topic
Yeah,
and learn from that, because you don't
absolutely.
know what you don't know. So you need to have something that is providing teaching to you in a structured way. Then
Yes.
there's some self-study. Now that you do know a lot more of a topic, you
Mm.
can discover stuff that you don't know.
Mm.
And through that, you're developing more understanding, building on what you previously didn't know you didn't know. So yeah, first have some formal study, then you build on that. So it's a bit like when you specialize. Like for someone to first be a generalist, there's loads of topics that they have to understand, but then they realize they want to specialize. They know they want to specialize, hence why they're able to then do some self-study. The
Absolutely.
third area is to network, and definitely if it's clinical UX, reach out to me.
Mm.
I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm technically on Twitter. Sorry, X, it's been renamed, hasn't it? Um, so reach out to me. I always make my time freely for people. It's very
Yeah.
important. I've got a responsibility, really. If I've come up with this term, I'm telling people to get into this field, I need to be available for people to hear from me and have
Yeah.
conversations and the like. But network with others that are in this field, peers,
Mm.
seniors, juniors. It's really important to network with people. Even
Yeah.
as earlier on,
Create
you
that
know,
community.
to me, I gave you advice and guidance, and now you're doing your own podcast. So, it's important
Yeah.
to speak with people. You never know what can come from
Absolutely.
those conversations, and it's definitely
Yeah.
had profound impact on my career. It's taken me
Yeah.
around the world. It's earned me money by
Yeah.
networking.
Yeah, and on mine too. Yeah, and
Mhm,
it's all a part of that perseverance that you mentioned at the beginning. It's kind of, if it's something you really want to do, then
mhm.
for me the logical step is to network, because that's your way to forge forward, learn more, pick people's brains, and
This
that's
is
what
it.
helped me, like you say,
Yeah, and
to
mentorship. Yeah, mentorship is another big part of that, though.
yeah,
Speaking to people who really have had more experience, more exposure to a particular
yeah,
situation, a work environment to yourself, getting
yeah,
advice from that. And then finally, put all that you've learned into practice. You need to have work experience. Try not
yeah,
to
yeah,
just work for free, especially for
yeah,
companies that have got loads of money. There's a tendency to do that. I don't encourage
yeah.
that.
No,
If
no,
a
no.
company really doesn't have any money, that's different. But try not to work for free, but do get work experience to put what you've learned
Yeah,
into practice. And using your network, get feedback from people. Using mentors, get feedback.
yeah,
But you need that formal study of some kind and build on that with your self study,
yeah.
network, mentorship, put what you've learned into practice through work experience. You do those 5 things, that will make you good at clinical UX, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I can vouch for all of those again, and for me as well. That was the thing alongside networking, was getting that real work experience. Because it can be
Mm.
difficult when you don't know like how to get that experience, because you're thinking, well, how
Yes.
can I get that experience if I don't get a job? But there are ways that you can do that. Like for me, like it was for free, but it was for a good cause. So helping and supporting
Mm.
non-profit organizations, that can be a
Yeah.
way to get that. And also for me, it helped me work in a team, get that experience of working with a UX designer, working with a product manager, working with engineers. Even
Mhm.
if it was non-profit, it still gives you that experience that you can then also demonstrate on your CV, on your portfolio. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally agree. Thank you, Dr. Giles. It was a pleasure to have you on and have this conversation this morning. I've been really like excited to get you on for a while, so I'm happy to be able to do that.
No, thank you again for inviting me. And again,
No
anybody, if
problem.
you want to reach out, just find me, drgilesmorrison, .com, or just find me on LinkedIn. You can find me. I'm there. I look forward to speaking.
Is there? Yeah, I'll share all of your pages, your LinkedIn page, etc. on all of the posts for this podcast. So if anyone is listening, check them out and you'll be able to find it. Cool.
Wonderful.
Thank you. We'll end it here. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye bye.